Ramin Chowdhury was a bright, cheerful 14-year-old girl who lived with her family in a peaceful neighborhood. Her family consisted of her elder brother, Etsham, who was 18, and their loving parents. Their home was always filled with laughter, warmth, and the strong bond of family values. Despite their busy routines, they made sure to have dinner together every night, discussing their day and sharing stories. Their father, Amjad Chowdhury, worked as an engineer, while their mother managed the household with care and affection. Edisham, being the elder sibling, was protective of Ramin. Though he often teased her playfully, he always made sure she was safe. Ramin, on the other hand, was full of energy and curiosity. She loved animals, especially birds, and would often spend her evenings in the park with her friends, playing and exploring. One such evening, as Ramin was playing with her friends in the local park, she noticed something unusual near a bush. A small green parrot lay there, motionless. Its tiny body was covered in dust, and one of its wings seemed injured. Ramin's heart ached at this sight. She was always the kind of girl who couldn't bear to see anyone in pain, whether human or animal. She rushed toward the bird, gently picking it up in her hands. The parrot's tiny eyes fluttered open, and it let out a weak chirp. Ramin's friends gathered around, curious about what she had found. "It's a parrot," one of them exclaimed. "It's hurt. We should leave it." "What if it has a disease?" another suggested. But Ramin shook her head firmly. "No, I can't leave it here. It needs help." Her friends, seeing the determination in her eyes, knew there was no point in arguing. Ramin had made up her mind. Carefully, she wrapped the bird in her scarf and rushed home, her heart pounding with worry. As soon as she entered the house, she called out, "Mama! Baba! Look what I found!" Her parents turned to see their daughter standing in the doorway, clutching a small bundle. Amjad Chowdhury set down his newspaper and walked over, curiosity etched on his face. "It's a parrot, Baba," Ramin said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's hurt. We need to help it." Her mother, though concerned about bringing a wild bird into the house, softened when she saw the desperate plea in Ramin's eyes. "Beta, we don't know if it's safe to keep a bird like this. It might not survive." "But we can try, Mama. Please, let's take it to a vet." Her father sighed, glancing at his wife before nodding. "All right, get ready. I'll take you." Ramin beamed with happiness and carefully carried the parrot as she followed her father out the door. They drove to the nearest veterinary clinic where the doctor examined the bird. "It's weak and has a minor wing injury," the vet explained. "Nothing too serious, but it needs rest and care. You'll have to feed it properly and make sure it stays warm." Ramin nodded eagerly, absorbing every word. The vet showed her how to feed the parrot using a dropper and instructed her to keep it in a small, comfortable cage. With a grateful heart, Ramin thanked the doctor and took the bird home. Over the next few weeks, Ramin dedicated herself to nursing the parrot back to health. She fed it, talked to it, and even played soft music, hoping it would feel comforted. Slowly, the little bird began to regain its strength. One evening, as Ramin was feeding the parrot, her mother gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Beta, the parrot is doing better now. Maybe it's time to set it free?" Ramin's heart clenched at the thought. She had grown attached to the little creature. The idea of letting it go felt unbearable. "No, Mama. Please let me keep it a little longer," she pleaded. Her father, who had been silently observing, spoke up. "Ramin, birds are meant to be free. If you truly care for it, you should let it go back to the sky where it belongs." Tears welled up in Ramin's eyes, but before she could respond, Edisham walked in. "Come on, guys, if she wants to keep it, let her keep it. It's not like we have a house full of birds." Their parents exchanged glances. They knew how stubborn Ramin could be. Finally, her mother sighed. "All right, but you'll be responsible for it." Ramin smiled, hugging her mother tightly. "Thank you, Mama. I promise I'll take good care of it." From that day on, the parrot became an inseparable part of Ramin's life. She named it Mithu, and it followed her around the house, hopping onto her shoulder whenever she sat down to study. Even Edsham, who initially pretended not to care, found himself amused by the bird's antics. "Looks like you have a new best friend," he teased one day as he watched Mithu nibble on Ramin's finger. Ramin laughed. "He understands me better than anyone." But what Ramin didn't know was that Mithu would soon play a role far beyond just being a pet. He would become her protector, her guide, and the reason she would be saved from a danger she never saw coming. As the days passed, Ramin continued her usual routine, going to school, spending time with Mithu, and enjoying her carefree life. But life had its own plans. Unbeknownst to her, a shadow was lurking in the background, watching, waiting. And soon, everything was about to change. Life continued as usual in the Chaudhry household, but changes were slowly creeping in. Edisham had completed high school and was now enrolled in college. His classes were demanding, and he spent long hours studying, which meant he could no longer pick up Ramin from school as often as he used to. This left Ramin commuting alone most of the time. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. Ramin was growing up and becoming more independent, but something about her daily routine began to feel unsettling. It started subtly, an uncomfortable feeling she couldn't quite place. She first noticed it while waiting at the school gate for her ride. The school's security guard, a man in his late 40s, had always been there. But lately, his gaze lingered longer than it should have. At first, Ramin told herself she was imagining things. Maybe he was just watching over the students like any responsible guard. But as days passed, his staring became more intense. Whenever she left the school premises, she could feel his eyes on her, burning into her back. One day, as she walked past him, she caught his gaze directly. He didn't look away. Instead, he gave her a small, unsettling smile. A chill ran down her spine. Mithu, perched on her shoulder inside the house, would often squawk loudly whenever she returned home from school, as if sensing her discomfort. She found solace in her little parrot, spending hours talking to him in her room. But she couldn't bring herself to talk to anyone else about what she was feeling. The discomfort grew. One afternoon, Ramin stayed late at school for a project. When she finally stepped outside, the schoolyard was nearly empty. She walked quickly towards the gate, clutching her bag tightly. As she approached, she saw the guard standing near his usual spot. "Late today, aren't you?" he said, his voice too familiar, too casual. Ramin forced a nod, not making eye contact. "Shouldn't be walking alone at this hour," he added, stepping a little closer. "The world isn't safe for girls like you." Something about the way he said it made her stomach twist. She wanted to run, but she forced herself to stay calm. Just then, a voice called her name. "Ramin!" She turned to see Edisham standing by his motorbike. Relief flooded through her. She hadn't expected him, but there he was, her protective elder brother. The guard stepped back slightly, his expression unreadable. Ramin hurried to Edisham, her hands trembling as she gripped her bag. "Hey, you okay?" he asked, sensing something was off. She nodded quickly. "Yeah, just tired." Edisham gave her a suspicious look, but didn't press further. They rode home in silence, but the feeling of unease didn't leave Ramin. That night she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Was she overthinking? Was the guard really looking at her the way she thought? Maybe it was all in her head. She turned to Mithu's cage, where the little parrot was perched, watching her with its bright eyes. "You believe me, don't you?" she whispered. Mithu let out a soft chirp, tilting its head as if understanding her. The next few days, Ramin tried to ignore the feeling, but the guard's presence felt more intrusive than before. He would linger around when she entered or left school, his eyes following her every move. One day she was heading out when she saw him standing by the gate, speaking to another staff member. Just as she walked past, he turned and muttered something under his breath. She wasn't sure what he said, but she caught a word, something that made her skin crawl. That was the moment she knew. This wasn't just in her head. Something was wrong. She needed to talk to someone. But who? Her parents? They might dismiss it, thinking she was imagining things. Edisham? He would probably make a scene, and she didn't want that kind of trouble. So she stayed quiet. But silence came with a price. Ramin stopped enjoying school. She no longer laughed with her friends the way she used to. Instead, she became more withdrawn, more cautious. She started leaving class a little earlier than the final bell, hoping to avoid running into the guard. Sometimes she would wait until a group of students was leaving and blend in with them. She even began faking stomach aches so she could skip school altogether. Her mother noticed the change. "Ramin, what's wrong with you these days?" she asked one evening as they sat at the dinner table. "You used to love school. Now you're always asking to stay home." "I just don't feel well, Mama," Ramin mumbled, stirring her food without appetite. Her mother frowned. "This has been going on for weeks now. Should I take you to a doctor?" "No." The response came out too quickly. Her father looked up from his plate. "Ramin, if there's something bothering you, you should tell us." But Ramin shook her head. "I'm fine. Really?" No one was convinced. After dinner, Ramin retreated to her room. She sat on her bed, staring at Mithu's cage. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. The parrot flapped its wings, hopping onto the edge of the cage. A tear slipped down Ramin's cheek. "Why can't I just tell them?" Mithu let out a sharp cry, startling her. Ramin wiped her tears. "Maybe I should," but the thought terrified her. What if no one believed her? What if things got worse? So she decided to keep pretending, to act normal, to hope that somehow the problem would go away on its own. But deep down, she knew. The danger was growing closer, and it was only a matter of time before something terrible happened. Ramin had always been a lively, talkative girl, but something had changed. She no longer laughed as freely as before, nor did she engage in conversations with the same enthusiasm. Her once bright eyes now carried a shadow of fear. Her parents, noticing the shift, initially thought it was just the stress of schoolwork, but Edisham knew better. He had seen her trembling hands that day when he picked her up from school. He had seen the way she flinched at unexpected sounds. Something was deeply wrong, and he was determined to find out what. One evening, as he walked past Ramin's room, he heard her whispering. Peeking inside, he saw her sitting on the floor, facing Mithu's cage. The little green parrot hopped around, tilting its head as if listening intently. Ramin's voice was soft but filled with emotion. "I don't want to go back, Mithu. I hate it there." The parrot let out a small chirp. "I wish you could tell someone for me," she sighed, resting her head on her knees. Etisham frowned. She was talking to a bird instead of confiding in her own family? He stepped into the room. "Ramin!" She startled, wiping at her eyes, quickly. "Oh, hi, you scared me." He leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. "What's going on with you?" "Nothing," she replied too quickly. Edisham sighed. "Come on, Ramin. I know you. You've been acting strange for weeks now. What's wrong?" Ramin looked away. "I told you nothing." "Is someone bothering you?" Her fingers tightened around the edge of her dress, but she shook her head. "No, it's just, I don't feel like myself these days." Edisham wasn't convinced, but he decided not to push her just yet. Instead, he glanced at the parrot and smirked. "You sure you're not just tired from all your deep conversations with Mithu?" Ramin managed a small, forced smile. "Maybe." But Edisham knew there was more to it. Over the next few days, things only got worse. Ramin, once eager to go to school, now found every excuse to stay home. One morning, as her mother entered her room to wake her up, she found Ramin curled under her blanket. "Ramin, wake up, Beta. You'll be late for school." "I don't want to go today, Mama," she mumbled. Her mother sighed. "You've been skipping too much already. What's the problem?" "My stomach hurts," Ramin lied. Her mother frowned. "That's the third time this week." Tears welled up in Ramin's eyes. "Mama, please." But her mother, thinking it was just another phase, shook her head firmly. "No more excuses. You're going." Ramin sobbed but obeyed. At breakfast, she barely touched her food. Edisham noticed her red eyes and the way her hands trembled slightly as she held her spoon. Their father, unaware of the depth of the situation, simply said, "Ramin, if something's bothering you, talk to us." But she stayed silent. A week later, her parents decided to visit her school. They met with her teachers, who were equally confused. "She's one of our brightest students," her English teacher said, "but lately she seems distracted. She barely participates in class anymore." Her mother looked worried. "Has she said anything to you about why she's acting like this?" The teacher shook her head. "No, but I've noticed she keeps to herself a lot now. She used to be so full of energy." Her father exchanged glances with his wife. After the meeting, they decided to talk to Ramin again. That night, her mother entered her room and sat beside her on the bed. "Beta," she said gently, "is there something going on at school?" Ramin froze for a second, but then shook her head. "No, Mama. Everything's fine." Her mother placed a hand on her back. "You can tell me anything." Ramin forced a smile. "I know, Mama. I'm just tired these days." But her mother wasn't convinced. As she left the room, she whispered a silent prayer, hoping whatever was troubling her daughter would pass. Etisham, however, refused to ignore the signs. That weekend, he knocked on Ramin's door and walked in. "We need to talk," Ramin sighed. "Bye. Not again." "Yes, again," he said, sitting on the edge of her bed. "I'm worried about you. You're not yourself anymore." She swallowed hard. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." His voice softened. "Ramin, if something is wrong, if someone is making you uncomfortable, you have to tell me." Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but then she shook her head. "It's nothing." Edisham clenched his jaw. He knew she was hiding something. But why wouldn't she tell him? Why wouldn't she tell anyone? That night, as Ramin lay in bed, she felt completely alone. Her parents knew something was wrong, but didn't understand. Her brother was trying, but she was too scared to open up. And Mithu, well, Mithu was just a bird. Except, that wasn't entirely true, was it? Mithu was the only one who knew. The only one who had listened when she whispered her fears late at night. And as the little parrot ruffled its feathers and let out a soft chirp, Ramin wished, more than anything, that he could somehow tell them all what she couldn't. But that was impossible, wasn't it? The next morning, she woke up with a deep sense of dread. She didn't want to go to school. She couldn't go, but her mother wouldn't listen to any more excuses. So with a heavy heart and trembling hands, she got ready. As she walked out the door, Mithu let out an unusually loud squawk. She turned back for a moment, staring at him. For the first time, she wished she could stay home forever. Because something told her, if she went to school today, things would never be the same again. Ramin woke up feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. The air in her room felt heavy, and a strange nausea churned in her stomach. She pulled the blanket over her head, hoping that if she hid long enough, the day would simply pass her by. But she knew better. It was her final exam today. There was no way her mother would let her stay home. Just as she expected, her mother entered her room, gently shaking her shoulder. "Ramin, wake up, Beta. You need to get ready for school." Ramin mumbled something incoherent, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. Her mother sighed. "I know you're tired, but this is your final paper. You can't miss it." "I don't feel well, Mama," Ramin whispered, her voice shaking. Her mother frowned, placing a hand on her forehead. "You feel a little warm, but it's nothing serious. You'll be fine." "No, Mama, please." Her mother's expression hardened. "Ramin, we've been through this. You've already skipped too many days. Get up, now." Tears welled up in Ramin's eyes. But she knew there was no way out. She had no choice. With a heavy heart, she got up, got dressed, and made her way to the breakfast table. Her father was reading the newspaper, and Edisham was scrolling through his phone. Edisham glanced at her, immediately noticing her pale face and sunken eyes. "You look terrible," he said. Ramin forced a weak smile. "Thanks, bye." "You sure you're okay?" he asked, lowering his phone. "I'm fine," she lied. Her mother placed a plate of toast in front of her. "Eat something. You need energy for your exam." But Ramin couldn't stomach a single bite. The car ride to school was silent. Edisham was the one dropping her off since he had the day off from college. He kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror, concern etched on his face. "You're acting weird," he finally said. "Like even weirder than before." Ramin clutched the strap of her school bag tightly. "I just don't want to go today." Edisham frowned. "Why not?" She didn't answer. "Sis, what's going on?" Silence. Edisham sighed in frustration. "Look, if something's wrong, just tell me. I can fix it." Ramin shook her head. "You can't fix this, Bai." Edisham tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Try me." But she didn't say another word. When they reached the school, she hesitated before opening the door. Edisham watched her. "Are you sure you don't want me to stay?" Ramin shook her head. No, I'll be fine. Another lie. She stepped out of the car, adjusted her bag on her shoulder, and walked toward the school gate. The moment she stepped inside, she felt it. That familiar, suffocating presence. Her heart pounded in her chest as she saw the school guard standing near the entrance, his eyes fixed on her. He smiled, her stomach twisted with fear. She wanted to turn around, run back to Aitcham, tell him everything, but she didn't. Instead, she lowered her head and walked past him, hoping he wouldn't do anything. He didn't, not yet, but she could feel his gaze burning into her back. Meanwhile, back home, Edisham couldn't shake the uneasy feelings settling in his chest. Something wasn't right. He tried to brush it off, but Ramin's terrified eyes kept flashing in his mind. He had never seen her like that before. He couldn't focus on anything, so after an hour of pacing back and forth, he decided to go talk to their mother. She was in Ramin's room, adjusting the bed sheets. Ami, does Ramin seem off to you? He asked. His mother looked up. She has been acting strange lately, yes. I thought it was just stress, but she trailed off frowning. Edisham sat on the bed, rubbing his forehead. Something's wrong, Ami. I can feel it. His mother sighed. I know. I've tried talking to her, but she won't tell me anything. There was a moment of silence, then suddenly she got up and walked toward the corner of the room. She picked up Mithu's cage and opened the door. Ami, what are you doing? Edisham asked, confused. Without answering, she reached inside, gently took Mithu in her hands and walked toward the window. Before Edisham could stop her, she released the parrot. Mithu flapped his wings wildly before soaring into the sky. Ami, Edisham exclaimed, why did you let him go? His mother sighed, looking out the window. Maybe keeping him caged was a mistake. Maybe this is why Ramin feels trapped too. Edisham frowned. That doesn't make sense. She turned to him, eyes filled with worry. I just have this feeling, Beta. A bad one. Edisham was about to respond when his phone buzzed. It was 2:00 p.m., school dismissal time. He grabbed his keys and left for school, still troubled by his mother's strange words. When he arrived at the school, something felt wrong. The students were leaving, chatting with their friends, but there was no sign of Ramin. He waited by the gate for a few minutes. Still no sign of her. A strange, sinking feeling settled in his gut. He walked up to a group of girls from Ramin's class. Hey, have you seen Ramin? One of them frowned. She wasn't in class today. Edisham's blood ran cold. What do you mean? She came to school this morning. The girls exchanged uneasy glances. We didn't see her. Maybe she was in another room? Edisham didn't wait to hear more. He ran inside, checking every hallway, every classroom, every corner. But she was nowhere. By now, panic had taken over. He rushed to the principal's office, his heart pounding. My sister is missing, he blurted out. The staff quickly sprang into action, searching the school grounds, but there was no trace of Ramin. She was gone, and Edisham had never been more terrified in his life. Edisham's mind raced as he dialed his parents' number. Ami, Ramin is missing, he shouted the moment his mother picked up. There was silence on the other end. Then his mother's panicked voice came through, trembling. What do you mean, missing? She went to school. I know, but she's not here. The teachers haven't seen her all day. A loud gasp. Then his father's voice, firm but shaken, took over. We're coming. Stay there. Edisham's hands clenched into fists as he ended the call. He had never felt this kind of fear before. A gut-wrenching, mind-numbing terror. He had to find her. Now. His parents arrived within minutes, their faces pale, their bodies tense. The school was in chaos, teachers and staff searching every room, every corridor. But there was no sign of Ramin. Beta, did she say anything this morning? His father asked, his voice cracking. Edisham shook his head, guilt crushing him. She wanted to skip school. She begged me. I should have listened. Tears welled up in his mother's eyes. Ya Allah, protect my daughter. Suddenly, Edisham saw something out of the corner of his eye, a flutter of green. His heart stopped. Mithu, the parrot. He was perched on the school fence, flapping his wings frantically, squawking as if trying to get Edisham's attention. Edisham frowned. How was Mithu here? His mother had freed him just a few hours ago. As if sensing Edisham's thoughts, Mithu let out a sharp cry and took off, flying low above the ground, straight toward the school's back alley. Edisham felt a surge of adrenaline. "Abu, I think Mithu is trying to show us something." Without waiting for a response, he took off running after the bird. His parents followed, confusion and desperation in their eyes. Mithu flew ahead, leading them away from the main school building, past the playground, and toward a deserted area behind the school, an abandoned storage shed. And then Edisham heard it, a scream. His blood turned to ice. "Ramin! Ramin!" he roared, sprinting toward the shed. The door was slightly open, and inside he saw it. Ramin. Tears streaked her face, her hands trembling as she pushed away from a shadowy figure. The school guard, the monster. Edisham didn't think. He didn't hesitate. With all the rage boiling inside him, he lunged at the man, his fist colliding with the guard's face. The man stumbled back, but Edisham wasn't done. He punched him again, fueled by pure fury. "You dare touch my sister?" he bellowed. The guard staggered, but then turned to run. But he didn't get far. Ramin, shaking but furious, grabbed a wooden stick from the floor and swung it hard, hitting the man's leg. He crashed to the ground with a pained grunt. By then, Edisham's father had reached them, pulling Ramin into his arms while his mother sobbed uncontrollably. Teachers and students had gathered, drawn by the commotion. And within minutes, the police arrived. The guard was arrested on the spot. But none of that mattered to Edisham. All that mattered was Ramin. She was safe. She was home. A new beginning. The next few days were tough for Ramin. She barely spoke, still haunted by the nightmares she had lived through. Her parents did everything they could to comfort her, but she remained distant. One afternoon, Edisham walked into her room and found her sitting by the window staring outside. Mithu was back, sitting on her shoulder, preening his feathers. "You okay?" Edisham asked gently. Ramin sighed. "I don't know." Edisham sat beside her. "You were really brave, you know." She looked at him, eyes filled with unshed tears. "I was so scared by." "I know." He swallowed hard. "I should have listened to you. I should have known something was wrong." Ramin shook her head. "It's not your fault." Edisham smiled slightly. "It's Mithu we should thank. If he hadn't led us to you." Ramin looked at the little parrot, her eyes softening. She reached out, stroking his feathers. "He saved me," she whispered. Mithu let out a happy chirp as if he understood. Ramin finally smiled, a real, genuine smile. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. And it was all because of a little green parrot who refused to let her go. The final message. This story is more than just about Ramin and Mithu. It's a reminder that sometimes the people we love are hiding their pain, that sometimes they don't have the courage to speak up. If you notice someone acting strange, withdrawn, afraid, unlike themselves, don't ignore it. Ask questions, listen, protect them. And if you ever find yourself in a situation like Ramin's, remember, you are not alone. There is always someone who will listen. Speak up. Seek help. You deserve to be safe. And if you want to hear more inspiring, thrilling, and emotional stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more meaningful stories to life. Stay safe, stay strong, and never stop believing in the power of courage.